Hello everybody and welcome to Books with Ike. My name is Isaac and today I'm going to be doing my April and May wrap-up. Clearly it has been a while since I last filmed a video. I did film one recently but I completely hated it, so I deleted all the footage. And since I read all of these books so long ago, I am going to be referring to my notes to talk about them. So if you see me looking to the side or you can hear the fan of my computer, that's why. I'm sorry I can't do anything about that. And so that we don't waste any more time, let's just get into it. So the first book I read in April was Lost in the Neverwoods by Aidan Thomas. And this is a Peter Pan retelling about a girl called Wendy who, when she was younger, went missing in the woods near her hometown. And she came back, but her brothers didn't, and she has no memory of what happened in that time. And then, some years later, the children of her hometown start to go missing, and everyone thinks it must be connected to her disappearance. Especially when they find a strange boy who knows her name. So, Aidan Thomas is the author of Cemetery Boys, which I really loved. And so this was a bit disappointing. I gave it 3.5 stars initially, but I think I would probably drop that down to just 3. The writing of this book is excellent. It's got some really dark and creepy atmosphere to it, and it is honestly terrifying. And it also really conveys Wendy's trauma and PTSD over what happened. But where the writing failed is in its extremely repetitive descriptions of Peter, obviously Peter Pan. They were just the same over and over again, and it was just really distracting and annoying. In terms of the characters, Wendy's trauma was handled really well, but there isn't really much else to her character. Her trauma kind of overshadows everything, which is probably realistic, but not that interesting to read about. Peter was a really fun character, and I loved their relationship together, except when it became romantic, because it was just weird and kind of creepy, because when you first meet Peter he's a child, and Wendy is a teenager. I think she's like 19, so... But there were lots of little kids in this story who were absolutely adorable, and the way that Peter and Wendy interacted with them was also adorable, so that was a great aspect of it. The plot was really dragged out and repetitive, and it was a really interesting plot, but it was undermined by having such a just bland, terrible antagonist, who was yet another ranting cliché, my favourite phrase for antagonists. But this time he wasn't even intimidating, so it was just bleh. And yeah, this book really doesn't justify its length. There is so little that happens. There clearly wasn't enough story here for this length of a book. So it's really padded out with pointless scenes of just Peter and Wendy having fun together, and it's just like, there should be a time limit on this should be a very frantically paced book, but it just isn't. So yeah, it also handled the parents' trauma really well, and it really discussed how trauma can hurt the people around you, especially Wendy, who should be able to depend on her parents, just isn't. Because they are so damaged by losing their kids that they've just basically shut down and can't parent properly. And that is really sad, but it was really well done. I think the plot twist, I predicted it quite early on, because flicking through the book I just saw one word and it sparked it in my head. But I don't know if I had just been reading it from the beginning that I would have picked up on that. I think ultimately it is quite obvious, maybe, but I can't really speak on that. And so yeah, overall, it's quite obvious that this was written before Cemetery Boys, and we knew that going in. You can tell. It's a much less polished work than Cemetery Boys is. I will definitely read more of Aidan Thomas's books in future. Gay Titanic in Space, yes, sign me up. But overall, this was just a bit disappointing. Obviously, I will leave lists of content warnings in the description, but I will say that this is one very rare case in which I would consider the main content warnings to be spoilers, so read them at your own discretion. The other book I read in April was Dead or Alive by Derek Landy, the latest book in the Skulduggery Pleasant series. If somehow you didn't know, Skulduggery Pleasant is my favourite series of all time. It is a middle grade urban fantasy series about a girl called Stephanie Edgley who becomes the apprentice of a magical detective who happens to be a reanimated skeleton. In the latest books in the series, Stephanie is 25 years old, whereas in the first book she is 12, so it's been going a while, and Skulduggery Pleasant has always tackled grey morality, but this book in particular goes very into it, and I won't say why, because to understand the plot of this you really need to have read everything previously, so I can't really say anything about it. As always, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4.5 stars because there are a couple of weird inconsistencies in the plot which really bug me. There are certain aspects of this book that just broke my heart, because there is a character that I had always assumed would be completely safe who dies in this, and it's just like, oh, why? There are some really interesting new characters introduced, there are some really interesting new concepts introduced. The romance in this book is the strongest it's been in the entire series, which makes it a shame what happens at the end. The way this series handles the main character's mental health develops really well as it goes along, and this is no exception. And obviously there are a lot of what the fuck is happening plot twists, and I can't wait to see how this series wraps up, because this is the penultimate book of the series. There is only one more, and I can't wait to see what happens. And then the first book I read in May was The Lies of Loch Lamora by Scott Lynch, a very beloved book by a lot of people. And so that makes it probably my most disappointing book of the year, because I really did not enjoy this. This is about a man called Loch Lamora who belongs to a gang of thieves who steal as part of their religion. They worship the Crooked Warden, the nameless 13th god, who is the god of thieves. And they steal from the aristocrats of the city of Camor, which is explicitly against the rules of what thieves in the city are allowed to do. Because there's this thing called the secret peace, blah blah blah, whatever. It's really difficult to explain the plot of this book because it doesn't start until about halfway through. So the first half of the book is basically just Locke running a confidence scheme against some aristocrats, and then the second half of the book is completely different. So I can't really explain it. So I didn't really care about the characters in this book. Locke and Jean, I found them really boring, honestly. And I really didn't care about their relationship either. It felt real, but I just wasn't given any reason to care about it. There were some characters I liked, but I can't really say anything about them because it's spoilers. And the world building was incredible, actually. That's my main point of praise for this book, is the world building is absolutely incredible. The flashbacks are really cute as well. Locke as a child is adorable and I love him. Locke as an adult I couldn't care less about. The plot does end up being very interesting, but the climactic fight scene is really boring. The pacing of this book is absolutely terrible as well. There are flashbacks throughout the second half of the book which kill any sense of momentum the story has, and the same is true of one specific flashback in the first half of the book. The writing style was occasionally brilliant and there was some decent comedy. The villain is really bland and forgettable and predictable and just boring and cliche. And so yeah, I gave this 3.25 stars. I think I'm probably gonna unhaul it, and I'm definitely not gonna read the rest of the series. After that, I read In Deeper Waters by F.T. Lukens, which was one of my most anticipated books of the year. This is a YA high fantasy romance about a prince called Tal, who is going on his coming-of-age tour of the island kingdoms that he is the prince of, and his ship comes across a burnt-out wreck, and they investigate, and in the wreck they find a boy who is chained up, and they rescue him from the wreck and bring him onto their ship, where he promptly jumps overboard and disappears. And everyone thinks this boy has, committed suicide, but then Tal sees him again, alive, on land, and perfectly fine. So yeah, there's some weird stuff going on. I think the plot twist is kind of obvious. It doesn't really hide what it is, but I'm not going to say anything about it in case you haven't worked it out already. But this book is just adorable. The main characters are both adorable, their relationship is adorable, Tal's relationship with his family is adorable. There are some great themes about privilege and responsibility, the plot is great, the world building is actually surprisingly good considering how short it is. There's some really good action and some really harrowing scenes. My main problem with the book is that Tal is dealing with being the only person in the world remaining who has magic, and everyone hates magic because Tal's grandfather was a terrible sorcerer who subjugated the entire world. And so one of the main aspects of the book is Tal's insecurity about his power, and how the other kingdoms would react if they found out about his magic. And I don't think the ending of this book properly addresses that. I feel like we should have got more on it. But overall, it was a really good standalone, but I do want more from these characters because they're just so great. But yeah, overall I really enjoyed this and I gave it 4 stars. And then the last book I read in May was Traitor's Moon by Lynn Llewellyn, the 3rd book in the Nightrunner series. And the first book, Luck in the Shadows, was about a boy called Alec of Kerry, who is arrested for poaching, and while he's in jail, he meets his fellow inmate Seragil, and he helps Seragil to perform a jailbreak, and Seragil decides to take him on as a travelling companion and eventually an apprentice, because Seragil is part of a secret spy network, and he thinks that Alec has what it takes to join them. This book takes place 2 years after the previous book, Stalking Darkness, and so Alec and Seragil's relationship is firmly established by this point. And that is my main problem with the book, honestly, because Alec and Seragil's relationship has not progressed as far as it should have in 2 years. They are completely adorable together, and I love their relationship. But Seragil won't accept comfort from Alec when he's upset, which is just so weird. It's been 2 years, they're practically married at this point, but the communication between them is not great. And the emotional availability and stuff is really weird. But that is my only real problem with the book. I really enjoyed it. I really loved Seragil's backstory and his development in this book. The world building is fantastic, and there is some great atmosphere. The city of Sarakali is just such an interesting location. I believe that's what it's called. Yes, Sarakali. But the way that the Orenfey treat Alec and Seragil is really just horrible to read about. It's very difficult. It has a really fun and complex plot, and it keeps you guessing, and there are a lot of twists, but it is a bit dragged out and repetitive, and ultimately it tells you the answer long before Alec and Seragil work it out themselves, so that's kind of annoying. The development to the story of the world is also really interesting, and I don't think I've ever seen a regime change handled in such a brilliant way. That's all I can really say on that without edging into spoiler territory. There are some incredible side characters in this, there is some really interesting foreshadowing that I can't wait to see where it goes, and the ending of this book is just really heartwarming and satisfying, but it's very bittersweet. So yeah, ultimately I loved this and I gave it 4 stars. So yeah, those are all the books I read in April and May this year. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to hear what you thought about them, so please leave that in the comments below. And also tell me about any books that you read, not necessarily in those months, but just recently. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. I have no consistent upload schedule, so please ring the bell so that you get notifications for when I've uploaded a new video. You can follow me on Twitter or add me as a friend on Goodreads if you feel like it, links to both of those in the description. Please feel free to DM me on Goodreads if you want to. I'm always ready to talk about books with anyone. I will hopefully have another video up soon, but until then, thank you for watching. I've been Isaac and this has been Books with Ike. Goodbye.